The land was old. It measured time in canyons and stone, not in the ticking of clocks or the turning of calendar pages. The 1860s, the 1870s. These were just whispers of a new language, spoken by men who drew lines on maps and called the earth property. To the Chiricahua Apache, this was simply home. It was a harsh home, a land of sparse, sun-bleached forests that clung to the sides of mountains, giving way to rocky plains dotted with agave and prickly pear. The beauty here was not soft. It was majestic and terrible, carved by wind and drought. The sky was an ocean of unbroken blue, so vast it seemed to press down on you, a constant reminder of how small a man was. A river, shallow but stubborn, cut a green wound through the brown earth. It was life. Cottonwoods and willows crowded its banks, a richer, denser green than the thin pines higher up. It was near this river, tucked into a fold of the hills, that a cabin stood. It was not an Apache structure. It was made of felled logs, roughly notched, a scar of straight lines in a world of curves. It had been built by a prospector years ago, a man who had dug for gold, found only hardship, and then vanished. Perhaps he had died of thirst, or a snake, or an Apache arrow. The cabin remained, empty, its roof slowly collapsing, a monument to a failed invasion. This was a time of endings that felt like battles. The white world was pushing in from all sides. Blue-coated soldiers built forts, wagon trains cut new ruts in the earth, and the telegraph wire was a thin black string singing a song of fences and borders. For the Apache, it was a fight not for glory, but for existence. They were shadows and wind, defending a homeland that was being measured, divided, and sold from under their feet. Every sunrise was a question, every sunset a temporary truce. The air itself felt tight, stretched thin with the unspoken threat of violence, the knowledge that two worlds were colliding and only one could remain. Nayati moved through this land like a part of it, indivisible from the dust and the rock. He was a tall man, built with the dense, functional strength of someone who lived by the bow and the long run. His shoulders were broad, his body lean. His hair was long and black, held back by a simple band. It was his eyes that held you. They were dark and sharp, missing nothing. They were the eyes of a hunter, but also the eyes of a man who had seen too much. They held the coldness of winter shadows. He lived by the traditions of his people. The world had rules. You honored the spirits. You provided for your family. You defended your homeland. You kept your word. These rules were stone. They were the foundation of his life, the structure that held him upright when everything else threatened to crumble. His goal was simple. Stark protect what was left, protect his people, protect this land that held the bones of his ancestors. Yet, deep inside, a friction existed, a small, hard kernel of doubt. He saw the rules his people followed, and he saw the white men who followed no rules he could understand. They killed the buffalo for their tongues. They clear-cut forests. They poisoned rivers. His own code felt rigid, sometimes brittle. Against this storm of chaos, he felt the pull of his duty. But there were moments, in the deep silence of the high desert, when he felt a profound loneliness. The traditions were good, but they were a cold comfort. This solitude had not been chosen. It had been carved into him. Years ago, he had not been this way. He had been a younger man, with a wife and a small son whose laughter was like the sound of the river in spring. He had been a man who knew how to smile. Then the soldiers had come. They had come not in open battle, but in a surprise raid at dawn, a slaughter of people still waking from sleep. Nayati had been hunting miles away. He had returned to smoke and silence, and a smell he would never forget. He had found them, his wife, his son. The soldiers had been thorough. The grief was not a clean cut. It was a jagged, tearing wound that had never healed. It had festered. It had frozen. The man who had been Nayati died that day. The one who stood in his place was someone else, a harder, colder being. He buried his family and with them. He buried his trust. He built a wall of silence and duty around himself. He was a warrior, respected, feared even, but he was alone. He moved among his people, but he was no longer truly one of them. He was a guardian, a ghost, walking the borders of their lives. He expected nothing. He relied on no one. He would protect his people until his own death, and that was all the future he allowed himself to see. Her name was Annie. She was a bride, or she had been. The white lace of her dress was ripped to shreds, stained with mud and blood and terror. She was young, with hair the color of sun-dried grass and eyes that were wide and vacant with shock. She was not a part of this land. She was a soft thing, brought from a world of painted houses and fragile teacups, and she had been thrown into the raw heart of the wilderness. She was not just lost. She was hunted. Days ago, her life had been simple. She was traveling with her new husband and his family, heading west to a new life in California. They had been optimistic, full of plans. Then the raiders had come. Not Apache, white men, brutal and lawless, smelling of whiskey and greed. They had attacked the wagon, killed the men, and taken the women and the supplies. Annie had been one of them. She had been their captive, dragged along, her mind shutting down against the horror of what she saw and what she feared. Last night, in the chaos of a drunken camp, she had seen a chance. A horse was loosely tethered. She had not thought. She had only moved. She ran, untied the rope, and pulled herself onto the horse's back, kicking it into a blind panic. She had ridden all night, with no sense of direction, only a desperate need for distance. The horse had finally thrown her, exhausted, and run off. Now she was on foot, alone. She had found the river and followed it, knowing it was her only chance for water. Every snap of a twig was a raider catching her. Every shadow was a threat. She was crying, but the tears were silent, hopeless. She huddled by the riverbank, a small, pale figure in a vast, indifferent landscape, worlds away from the Apache warrior who moved through the same hills. She was a woman who had lost her family, her husband, her future, and now, even her way. She had run from one nightmare only to find herself in another, a wilderness that had no mercy for the weak. Nayati had one friend, Tato. They had grown up together, hunted together, fought together. Tato was different from Nayati. He was shorter, stockier, with a face that seemed to be set in a permanent scowl of determination, where Nayati was silent and watchful. Tato was fire and certainty. He was a fierce protector of the Apache way, and for him, there was no gray in the world. There was only Inde, the people, and there was everyone else, the enemy. He saw the white men as a pestilence, a plague to be fought and driven out. He had no patience for Nayati's brooding silence, though he respected his skill. Tato worried about his friend. He had seen the light go out of Nayati's eyes after his family was killed, and he feared the coldness that had replaced it. But he also saw that coldness as a weapon, a necessary hardness for the war they were in. "You see too much, Nayati," Tato said one evening as they sat by a small, smokeless fire, roasting a rabbit. "You look at them. You try to understand them. There is nothing to understand. They are locusts. They come, they devour, and they move on. You must only kill them." Nayati looked into the fire. The rabbit sizzled. "They are not all the same, Tato." Tato spat onto the dust. "They are all the same. Their skin is the same. They're soldiers. They're prospectors. They're farmers. They all carry the same sickness. They want the land, our land. You think a farmer is different from a soldier. The farmer brings the soldier. The soldier protects the farmer. It is one snake, with two heads. You must cut off both." "Your anger makes you blind," Nayati said quietly, not looking up. "And your sorrow makes you weak," Tato retorted, though his voice softened slightly. He did not mean it as an insult. It was a statement of fact, a worry. You have been alone too long. You live with ghosts. A man cannot live with ghosts. He must live with the people. Nayati said nothing. He turned the rabbit over. The smell of cooked meat filled the cool air. He knew his friend was right. In his own way, Tato's world was simple, clean. It was a good world for a warrior. Nayati's world was a broken thing, full of shadows and memories. He was loyal to his people. He would die for them. But he could not find the simple, burning hatred that Tato carried. His own grief was too large. It left no room for anything else. It was a cold, heavy stone in his chest, and he carried it with him, alone, through the high, lonely country that was all he had left. The afternoon sun was hot, but the air held the first crisp promise of autumn. Nayati moved without sound, his moccasins brushing the dry pine needles and dusty rock. He was tracking a mule deer, a big buck, following signs that only his eyes could see: a scuffed pebble, a freshly nibbled leaf, the faint indentation in the soil. His mind was clear, empty of everything but the hunt. This was his element. Here, there were no ghosts, no soldiers, no past. There was only the wind, the scent of juniper, and the stalk. He paused, testing the air. The deer was close, just over the next rise, moving toward the river. Nayati shifted his weight, preparing to circle downwind, when a sound reached him. It was wrong. It was not the chirp of a bird, nor the scurry of a lizard. It was not the wind in the cottonwoods. He froze, becoming one with the boulders around him. He listened. The sound came again, thin and rhythmic, a soft tearing. It was the sound of a human being in distress. His hand went to the knife at his belt. His eyes scanned the ridgeline, the brush thickets, the spaces between the trees. A trap. It was the first thought. Soldiers, or perhaps prospectors, using a captive as bait. He was a shadow, moving from rock to rock, his bow now in his hand, an arrow ready. He flowed through the landscape, a hunter still, but the prey had changed. He reached the edge of the embankment overlooking the river. He parted the willow branches and looked down. She was there, the white woman, the one whose tattered wedding dress looked so wrong in this land. She was huddled on a small patch of sand near the water's edge, her knees drawn to her chest. Her thin shoulders were shaking. She was crying. Nayati watched her for a long time. His mind could not make sense of the image. He had seen grief. He had seen the stoic, silent mourning of his own people, a pain that was deep and quiet as stone. This was different. This was a loud, wet, helpless thing. It was an outpouring, a surrender. He had seen animals make sounds like this when they were trapped, a hopeless keening. He found it perplexing and faintly repulsive. It seemed weak. To make such a noise was to invite danger. Every predator in these hills, man or animal, would be drawn to that sound. It was a failure of survival. She cried for her lost world. She cried for the face of her new husband, a kind face she had known for only a few weeks, now gone, vanished in a moment of brutal violence. She cried for her mother, for the home in the East she would never see again. She cried because she had run from the raiders, run until her horse had fallen, run until her feet were bloody, and she was still not safe. She had run from one terror into a vast, empty wilderness that did not care if she lived or died. She was alone, starved, and her entire life had been burned to ash. She wept because there was nothing else left to do. Nayati remained hidden, his gaze cold and analytical. He saw the tattered lace, the filth, the pale skin scratched and bleeding. He saw that she was unarmed, her hands empty, her body curled in on itself like a dying insect. This was no trap. She was alone. He felt nothing he could name as pity. Pity was a soft thing, and he had no soft places left. What he felt was a cold spark of recognition. He, too, was a creature of profound loss. His own family, his son, his wife, had been taken from him, wiped away. His grief was a frozen block of ice in his chest. Hers was this river of noise. It was strange. He wrestled with his code. He could leave her. The coyotes would find her by nightfall. It was the way of the land. She was white. She was Pinda Likoyi, the enemy. Her people were the ones who had destroyed his world. It would be justice to leave her. But he did not move. He could not. It was not the warrior's code that held him, but something older. You did not watch a human being, even this one, die like this. It was a bad thing. It would bring bad spirits. It was an imbalance. He felt a deep, slow anger rise in him. An anger at her. Why had she come here? Why was she forcing this choice upon him? She was a complication, a stone in his path. He stood up. Annie did not hear him. The sound of her own sorrow filled her ears. When his shadow fell over her, she looked up, and the breath left her body in a silent scream. He was not one of the raiders. He was something else, tall, dark, his black hair held back by a band. His face was hard, carved from the same rock as the canyons, and his eyes were black and depthless. He wore buckskin leggings and a breechcloth. He held a bow in one hand, and a knife was at his waist. He was the savage she had been warned about her entire life. This was the end. She scrambled backward, pushing herself against the mud bank, her hands slipping. She was too weak to run, too terrified to even make a sound. Nayati just stood there, watching her. He saw the terror in her eyes. It was a familiar sight. He had seen it in the eyes of soldiers before he killed them. But this was different. It was not the terror of a fighter, but of prey. He said nothing. He made no sudden moves. He held up one hand, palm forward, slowly. It was a gesture he had seen settlers use. He did not know what it meant to them, but to him, it meant he was pausing. He studied her. She was younger than he had first thought. Her face was gaunt, her lips cracked and bleeding. She was starving and dying of thirst. With a sigh, a small puff of air that spoke of profound irritation, he made his decision. He turned his back to her, a deliberate movement. He unslung the water skin from his shoulder. He turned, took 2 steps toward her, and placed it on the sand. Then he backed away, moving to the edge of the trees, his face impassive. Annie stared at the skin. It was water. Her throat was a dry knot of fire. Her whole body screamed for it. Her fear of him and her physical need warred for a terrible second. The need won. She lunged for it, her hands clumsy, fumbling with the wooden stopper. She pulled it free and lifted the skin to her mouth, gulping the water down. It was warm, and tasted of leather and dust, and it was the most wonderful thing she had ever known. She drank too fast, choked, and coughed, water spilling down the front of her ruined dress. Nayati watched. She was an animal, a lost calf. He felt the weight of responsibility settle on him, heavy and unwanted. He had given her water. He had acknowledged her life. Now she was his. He grunted, a sharp sound. He gestured with his head. Up, move! Annie flinched, huddling over the water skin, protecting it. He strode forward. He did not offer a hand. He grabbed her by the upper arm, his fingers biting into her skin. He hauled her to her feet. She was light, a thing of sticks and rags. She cried out, a small sound of fear, and stumbled, her legs too weak to hold her. He did not slow down. He began walking, pulling her along. He was not gentle. He was a man with a task, and she was the burden. They left the riverbank and climbed into the sparse, rocky hills. Annie stumbled, fell to her knees, and he would pull her up again, his grip iron. He did not speak. The silence was more terrifying than a threat would have been. She was his captive, being dragged to a place she could not imagine, by a man who looked at her as if she were a rock, or a troublesome dog. The walk was a blur of pain and fear. The sun beat down. Thorns tore at her dress. Twice she fell, and twice he hauled her back to her feet with that same impatient roughness. He moved with a long, ground-eating stride, and she had to half-run to keep up. Finally, as the shadows began to stretch long, they crested a ridge. Below them, tucked into a small canyon sheltered by pines, was a collection of brush shelters, wickiups. Smoke rose from a few cooking fires. Horses grazed in a nearby rope corral. Dogs barked at their approach. It was the Apache camp. As they entered the clearing, the world stopped. A child playing with a stick froze, dropped it, and ran to its mother's skirts. The women who were scraping a deer hide looked up, their knives pausing. Their faces, open and unguarded a moment before, turned to stone. They looked at Nayati, and then at the white woman he was dragging. Their eyes were not like his. His were cold and empty. Theirs were hot. They were filled with a burning, palpable hatred. One older woman, whose face was a map of grief, spat on the ground near Annie's feet. She muttered the word, Pinda Likoyi. The word was a curse. Annie shrank, trying to pull away, but Nayati's grip was locked on her arm. He ignored the women. He ignored the stares of the few old men sitting in the sun. He walked toward the center of the camp, pulling her with him. Then Tato appeared. He came out of the largest wickiup, his face already dark. He had heard the dogs, seen the people stop. He saw his friend, Nayati, and then he saw the white thing attached to his arm. Tato stopped. For a full second, he did not move, his body rigid with disbelief. Then he strode forward, his hands clenched at his sides. He stopped directly in Nayati's path, so close they were almost touching. He did not look at Annie. He looked only at Nayati. He spoke, his voice low and dangerous, in the Apache tongue. "What is this?" Nayati's face was unreadable. He did not release the woman. "I found it by the river." Tato's eyes were blazing. "It is a white woman. You bring this thing into our home." She was alone, starving. Tato laughed, a short, harsh bark. "So you leave her. The buzzards must eat. The coyotes must eat. It is the way. Why do you bring this snake to us?" "She is not a snake." Nayati's voice was flat. "She is nothing. She is everything." Tato's voice rose, and now others began to gather, listening. "She is a spy. She is the eyes of the soldiers. She sees our camp. She sees how many warriors we have. She sees where we keep our horses. When she runs, she will run to the fort, and they will come. She will not run. I will watch her." You, Tato, looked him up and down. "You will watch her, you, who cannot even see the danger in front of you. You bring this plague among our children, among our wives." Nayati's grip on Annie's arm tightened. She whimpered in pain. Tato pointed a finger, not at Nayati, but at Annie. "She is the reason they hunt us. Her people. They come and they build their wood houses and they tear up the earth. They drive away the deer, and when we fight back, they send the blue coats." He took a step closer to Nayati, his voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "You, of all people, have you forgotten? Have you forgotten the smell of your own wickiup burning? Have you forgotten the soldiers who did this? This is one of them. She is the same. Her skin is the same." Nayati's jaw clenched so hard a muscle jumped. The blood drained from his face, leaving the dark skin ashen. His eyes, fixed on Tato's, were suddenly terrible. Tato did not back down. He was Nayati's friend, but this was more than friendship. This was the survival of the people. "Kill it," Tato said, his voice quiet now. "Kill it, or let it go. But do not keep it here. It is a weakness. It is a poison. You let this in, Nayati, and it will rot you. It will make you soft. It will make you forget." Nayati stood silent for a long moment. The entire camp was watching. Annie, understanding nothing but the tone, was shaking violently, convinced she was about to be killed. Finally, Nayati spoke. His voice was cold, empty. "She is my captive, my responsibility." He did not wait for Tato to reply. He turned, shoving Annie so hard she fell to her knees. He walked past his friend, dragging her toward the edge of the camp. There, set apart from the wiki-ups, was the old cabin built by the prospector. It was a ruin, a small, dark box of rotting logs. It was used for nothing. Nayati pushed open the sagging door. The inside was dark, smelling of dust and mouse droppings. He shoved Annie inside. She fell onto the hard-packed dirt floor. He looked down at her, a crumpled, filthy heap of white lace and terror. He spoke to her for the first time. The English word felt thick and strange on his tongue. "Stay." He pulled the door shut, plunging her into near darkness. He found a heavy log and propped it against the door, barring her in. He stood outside the cabin, his back to it, facing the camp. Tato was still standing there, watching him, his face a mask of anger and betrayal. The women were muttering, their voices like angry bees. Nayati did not move. He stood guard over the prison he had just created. He felt the cold stone of his grief in his chest, the one he always carried. But now, it had a new companion, a burning, confusing resentment. He had done what he must. He had not let a person die. But in doing so, he had brought the enemy into his home. He had defied his oldest friend, and he had tied himself to the strange, weak creature who was now crying again, her sobs muffled by the thick log walls of the cabin. He looked at his hands, as if they were not his own, baffled by the choice they had made. The camp settled, but it was the stillness of a held breath. Night did not bring peace. It brought a sharpening of the tension. The cooking fires burned low, and people spoke in hushed, angry tones. Nayati stood his guard outside the rotting log cabin, a solitary, unmoving silhouette against the darkening sky. He could hear the faint scuffling of mice from within the walls, but from the woman, there was only silence. He had fulfilled his duty as he saw it, but the cost was the trust of his people. He felt their eyes on him, a heavy weight of accusation. Tato approached again. The fire in his eyes had cooled, but into something harder, like tempered steel. He did not shout this time. He stopped a few feet from Nayati, his arms crossed. He spoke quietly, for Nayati's ears alone. "The council has met," he said, "not as a friend, but as a spokesman. They do not understand your mind. You, who lost more than any of us to the white coats. You are the one who shelters one. It is a bad sign." Nayati's face remained stone. "She is a captive." "A captive?" Tato's voice was laced with contempt. "A captive is a prize, a horse, a rifle, a strong woman to work hides. That," he jutted his chin toward the cabin, "is a mouth that eats our food. It is a set of eyes that spies on our camp. It is a symbol of your weakness." Nayati's gaze shifted from the darkness to his friend. "I am not weak." "Are you not?" Tato stepped closer, his voice dropping. "She is a woman of your enemy. Her people came, and your wife is dead. Her people came, and your son is dead. And you bring her here, you guard her door, as if she is something precious. What do you think the others see? They see a man who has forgotten. They see a man who has betrayed the blood of his own family." The world seemed to drop away from Nayati. He felt the blood leave his face. Tato's words were knives, and they struck the one place Nayati had left undefended his grief. He had built his walls of ice, but Tato had just walked through them. "You will not speak of them," Nayati whispered, his voice shaking with a sudden, cold rage. "I will," Tato said, unmoving, though he knew the danger. "I will speak of them because I love them too. I will speak of them because you are dishonoring their memory. You are holding this white woman, and it is an insult to the ground that covers them." Nayati's hand flashed to his knife. Ta-To did not flinch. They stood frozen. Two friends who were now enemies, the space between them humming with the threat of death. "Kill me," Ta-To challenged. "And you prove my words. You have gone mad. You have let the ghost of this white woman poison your mind. Or, kill her. End this. Be the warrior you were. But you cannot do both. You cannot be Nayati, the defender of the people, and also be the guard dog for a Pinda Likoyi." Nayati's hand trembled on the hilt of his knife. He was choking on his own rage, on the injustice of the accusation. He had not forgotten. He could never forget. Every breath he took was filled with the smoke of his burning wickiup. His gaze was terrible, a look of pure murder. "The council gives you until sunrise," Ta-To said, ignoring the knife. "At sunrise, the warriors will take her. We will do what you cannot. We will protect our camp. We will protect our families. We will do what you should have done at the river. We will end it." He turned his back on Nayati. A deliberate, final insult. He walked away, leaving Nayati alone in the darkness, shaking. Not from the cold, but from the war that had just been declared inside his own camp. He was a man cornered. He was trapped between the memory of his dead family and the unwanted life he had saved. Inside the cabin, Annie had pressed herself into the far corner, as far from the door as she could get. She had been in darkness for hours. The light from the setting sun had faded from the single crack in the log wall, and now the blackness was absolute. It was a cold, breathing darkness, filled with small, terrible sounds. The scratching of rodents, the rustle of insects, the mournful sigh of the wind as it pushed through the gaps in the logs. She was a prisoner. Her mind, numbed by shock and exhaustion, was finally beginning to work, and it offered her no comfort. She replayed the scene at the camp, the hatred in the eyes of the women, the terrifying argument between the two men. She did not understand their words, but she understood the gestures. She understood the face of the man who had confronted her captor. It was a face of pure, murderous rage. He wanted her dead. And Nayati, the man who had found her, he had not saved her. He had captured her. He had dragged her here to this fate. Why? Why had he bothered? Why give her water only to lock her in a box to die? She remembered his eyes. They were not cruel. Like the raiders, they were worse. They were empty. They were the eyes of a man looking at a stone, or a dead branch. He felt nothing for her at all. She was cornered between two worlds, her old life, her husband, her family. All of it was gone, burned away by the raiders. She could not go back. And this new world, this place of hard faces and sharp knives, this world did not want her. She was a piece of refuse, something to be argued over and then discarded. She thought of her home in the East, of her mother's kitchen, of the smell of baking bread and the feel of a soft bed. It seemed like a dream from another life. She was an alien, a creature that did not belong, and she was going to die here, in this filthy, dark hole. The sun went down, and the true cold of the high desert began to seep in. It was not a gentle cold. It was a thin, sharp, invasive cold that found its way through her ruined lace dress and into her bones. Her skin pebbled. She began to shiver. At first, it was a small tremor. But as the hours passed, the shivering became a deep, uncontrollable shuddering. It was a violent, painful convulsion that shook her entire body. She wrapped her arms around herself, pulling her knees to her chest, but there was no warmth to be found. The dirt floor was like a sheet of ice. She was dying. She realized it with a dull certainty. The man, Nayati, had locked her in here. He would not come back. He was letting her freeze. It was a slower death than a knife, but just as certain. She had escaped the raiders only to die of the cold, alone in the dark. The shivering became so bad she could not catch her breath. Her teeth chattered, a rapid, desperate clicking that seemed to fill the small space. She was losing feeling in her fingers and toes. Despair, colder than the air, settled over her. The heavy log outside the door scraped against the wood. Annie's heart stopped. She flattened herself against the back wall, a raw scream frozen in her throat. This was it. The other one, the angry one, had come. He had come to kill her. The door swung open, a rectangle of pale moonlight against the black. A tall figure blocked it. It was him, Nayati. She could see he carried a bundle in his arms. He stepped inside, his movements precise. He did not look at her. He walked to the center of the cabin, where the long-dead prospector had built a crude fireplace of stacked stones. He dropped the bundle of dry twigs and branches. He knelt, his back to her. She watched, paralyzed, as he took a small kit from his belt. He worked with economical, practiced motions. He struck a spark, catching it in a pinch of tinder. He blew on it gently. Nurturing the tiny ember, he added twigs. A small flame sprang to life. The light was shocking. It threw huge, dancing shadows against the walls. It illuminated his face, all hard angles and shadow. Concentrated on his task, he added larger sticks, building the fire with a careful hand. Warmth began to push back the killing cold. It was a living thing, a small miracle in the darkness. Annie watched him. He had not spoken. He had not acknowledged her. He was simply building a fire, as if he were alone. When the fire was stable, casting a dim, flickering orange light through the cabin, he stood up. He turned, and for a moment, his eyes met hers. She flinched, expecting a blow, a word, anything. He said nothing. He simply looked at her, huddled in the corner, her body still shaking violently. Then he turned and walked to the door. He paused. He looked out into the darkness of the camp. He looked at the sky. He could feel the wind cutting at him, sharp as glass. He had stood guard for hours. He was cold, he was tired, and he was trapped. He could not leave her unguarded, not after Tato's threat, and he could not stand out there all night and freeze. With a sigh of deep weariness, he made a choice. It was not about her, it was about survival. He stepped back inside. He pulled the door closed, plunging them back into dimness, lit only by the small, crackling fire. He did not bar it. He walked to the wall opposite her. He sank to the ground, his back against the rough logs. He drew his knife and laid it on the dirt floor beside his hand. He pulled his knees up, resting his arms on them. He was not resting. He was watching. He was guarding his prisoner. The silence in the cabin was thick. It was broken only by the snap of the fire and the low moan of the wind outside. Annie's shivering began to lessen as the warmth crept into her. She was still terrified, but the immediate threat of freezing to death had passed. She looked at him. He was not looking at her. He was staring into the fire. The firelight softened the hard lines of his face. She saw the weariness in his posture. She saw the deep lines etched around his eyes. He did not look like a savage. He looked like a man carrying a weight too heavy to bear. He looked sad. Annie's own grief, held at bay by pure terror, rose up in her. She thought of her husband. She thought of her family. She thought of the life that had been stolen from her. She was a bride, and she was a widow, and she was a prisoner, all in the space of a few days. The sheer helplessness of it, the profound loss, overwhelmed her. A sob, hot and painful, broke from her throat. She clapped her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide, terrified. She had made a noise. She had shown that weakness. He turned his head. His dark eyes met hers across the small fire. She waited for the anger, the disgust. He would hit her. He would tell her to be silent. He did not. He just watched her. His face was unreadable. He did not move. He did not speak. He just sat there and listened. His stillness was an anchor. It was not forgiveness, and it was not kindness. It was just presence. He was not judging her. He was simply There. The dam inside her broke. The tears she had held back, the terror, the grief, it all came pouring out. She buried her face in her arms and wept. She cried quietly, her body shaking with the force of her sorrow. But she did not make the loud, wailing noise she had made by the river. This was a different kind of crying. It was the sound of a complete and total breaking. Nayati sat and listened. He did not look away. He listened to the sound of her world ending, and he recognized it. It was the sound he had locked inside himself for years. It was the sound of the silence after the raid. It was the sound of his own frozen heart. He looked back at the fire. He let her cry. A long time passed. The fire burned down to glowing coals. Annie's sobs subsided into shudders, and then into silence. The cabin was quiet again. But the silence had changed. It was no longer empty, it was full. Annie raised her head. Her face was swollen, stained with dirt and tears. She looked at him. He was still there, watching the coals. Her voice was a dry, broken whisper. "You could have let me freeze." He did not move. He did not look at her. "At the river," she whispered, her throat raw. "You brought water. Tonight, you built a fire." She took a shaky breath. "I do not understand. Your people, they hate me. But you did not leave me." She looked down at her hands. "Thank you." The words hung in the small space. Thank you. He had heard them before from white men, traders, and soldiers. It was a word they used when they wanted something, a word that meant nothing, but this was not that. This was the sound of a small, hard thing being offered. It was the only thing she had left to give. He turned his head and looked at her. He gave a single, short nod. It was barely a movement. Annie held his gaze. The terror was still there, but something else was pushing through it. A flicker of something. Understanding. "You are alone," she said. It was not a question. It was a statement. She saw it in him, the way he sat, the emptiness in his eyes that she now recognized. It was the same emptiness she felt in herself. Nayati's breath caught. He stared at her. This white woman, this enemy, this creature of rags and terror, had just looked past his walls. She had seen him. She had seen the truth that he hid from his own people, the truth that Tato called weakness. She had seen his solitude. He did not answer. He did not need to. He broke his gaze from hers and turned back to the glowing coals. He picked up his knife and slid it back into its sheath. Outside, the wind howled. Tato was out there. The warriors were out there. The sentence of death was waiting with the sunrise. But inside the small, rotting cabin, something profound and dangerous had shifted. Two people from two worlds that were at war sat on opposite sides of a dying fire. They were not Apache and white. They were not captor and captive. They were just two people, shattered by loss, sharing a moment of warmth in a world determined to destroy them. A strange, fragile, and powerful connection had been forged in the shared silence. And they were both, in that moment, utterly and completely alone, together. The first light of dawn was a pale, cold gray. It filtered through the cracks in the log walls, illuminating the fine dust motes hanging in the air. The fire was dead, a circle of black ash. The cold had returned, more bitter than before. Annie was awake. She had not slept. She sat huddled, her body aching with cold and tension, watching the man across the cabin. He had not slept either. He sat against the wall, his arms resting on his knees, a statue of silent vigilance. They had not spoken again. The shared silence of their grief had been buried by the growing light, and now the terror was back. The sun was rising. The deadline. The scraping sound came from outside, not the log this time. Footsteps, the heavy, deliberate tread of men. Annie's breath hitched. She looked at Nayati. He stood up in one fluid, silent motion, The weariness was gone. He was a warrior again. His face was a hard, impassive mask. He picked up his bow and slung the quiver onto his shoulder. His knife was at his belt. He looked at Annie, his eyes flat and cold. He jerked his head toward the door. "Move!" She did not want to. To go out that door was to walk to her death. But to stay was to die here. She pushed herself up, her legs numb and weak. She was shaking so badly she could barely stand. Nayati pulled the door open. The bright, sharp morning light was blinding. He stepped out into the cold air. Annie followed, her hand half covering her eyes. She stumbled over the threshold. They were there, Tato, and with him, 5 other warriors. They were armed. Their faces were closed, set in grim determination. They had come to do what Nayati would not. Tato stood in the center, his arms crossed. He looked at Nayati, and then his gaze slid to Annie. It was a look of pure loathing. He looked back to Nayati. "The sun is up," Tato said. His voice was final. Nayati positioned himself between the warriors and the cabin door, where Annie was frozen. "The sun is up," he agreed. His voice was calm. "Step aside," Tato commanded. "This is the council's will." The council's will was for me to decide. Nayati said, "I have decided." "You have decided madness," one of the other warriors growled, shifting his grip on his lance. "She will not be killed," Nayati said. It was not a plea. It was a statement. Tato's eyes narrowed. "You defy the council. You defy the people for this." He spat the last word. "She is my captive," Nayati said, his voice ringing with a cold authority that Annie had not heard before. "I found her. I brought her. She is my property. By the law of the Inde, her life is mine to take, or mine to spare. You will not touch her." This gave them pause. He was not arguing for mercy. He was arguing for his rights. He was invoking a code older than the council, the warrior's right to his own captives. To challenge it was to challenge Nayati directly. Tato was shaking with a suppressed rage. This was a trick, a violation of the spirit of the law. "She is not a horse or a rifle. She is a white, a spy." "She is my captive," Nayati repeated, his hand moving to rest on the hilt of his knife. "If you wish to take her, you must come through me." It was a challenge, a declaration of war in the middle of their own camp. The other warriors looked at each other, uncertain. Nayati was not just any man. He was their best hunter, their most cunning fighter. To fight him was to spill the blood of their own. Tato stared at his friend. He saw the cold certainty in Nayati's eyes. He saw the wall that had been built. And he knew, in that moment, that his friend was lost. He had chosen the white woman over his brothers. "You have made your choice," Tato said, his voice heavy with a new kind of grief, a cold anger. "You claim her, then you are responsible for her. She is your shadow, and you will wear her." He turned. "She is Pindalikoi. She is not Inde. She will not sleep in a wickiup. She will not eat from our fires. She is your shadow. Let her live in the shadow." He gave Nayati one last look, a look of profound betrayal. Then he turned and walked away. The other warriors hesitated, and then, one by one, they followed him, leaving Nayati and Annie alone in the harsh morning light. Annie was breathing in short, shallow gasps. She did not understand the words, but she understood the outcome. She was alive. For now. Nayati turned to her. His face was grim. The brief connection in the cabin was gone. He was her master. He pointed to the river. "Water." He pointed to the stacks of wood near the cooking fires. "Wood." He grabbed her arm, pulled her away from the cabin, and pushed her toward an old woman who was stirring a pot. The woman looked at Nayati, and then at Annie, her face filled with scorn. Nayati spoke to the woman in Apache. She argued. He spoke again, His voice sharp, the woman relented, her displeasure obvious. She shoved a large, heavy water skin, a cured animal bladder, into Annie's hands. "Work," Nayati said to Annie. Then he turned and strode away, into the hills, to hunt. He did not look back. And so Annie's life began. It was not a life. It was an existence. She was the camp slave. The old woman, whose name she'd learned was Taza, became her reluctant and cruel master. The first few days were a blur of pain. She was sent to the river to haul water. The skin, when full, was agonizingly heavy. She would half fill it, and Taza would empty it on the ground and point, "More." She stumbled on the rocks, her thin shoes, the remnants of her wedding, falling apart. She had to learn to walk barefoot, her soft feet cut and bruised by the sharp stones. She gathered firewood. She had to range far from the camp, picking up dry branches, her hands becoming scratched and raw. The other women would pass her, their own bundles large, and they would not look at her. They would speak to each other, and sometimes they would laugh. She was a ghost. She was the white woman. She was less than a dog. The camp dogs, at least, were fed scraps. She was given scraps at the end of the day, when everyone had eaten. Taza would toss her a piece of dry, hard bread made from mescal flour, or a strip of stringy, leftover meat. She ate it hunched by the door of the rotting cabin, which was now her only home. She slept on the dirt floor, with no blanket. Nayati did not return. Her pretty lace dress was a joke. It was shredded, filthy. One day, Taza threw a bundle at her. It was a cast-off buckskin shift, worn thin and stained. But it was whole. It was strong. Annie took off the rags of her old life and pulled the shift over her head. It was stiff and smelled of smoke and sweat. It was the clothing of a savage. She cried when she put it on, but the tears were silent. The lace was a memory of a person who was dead. This shift was the skin of the creature she was becoming. Every day was a struggle. She did not understand the rules. She only learned them when she broke them. She walked too close to the warriors' area, and Ta to himself shouted at her, his face so full of hate she ran. She tried to take water from the river upstream from where the women were, and Taza struck her, a hard, stinging blow across the face. She learned to be invisible. She learned to keep her eyes on the ground. She learned to move to the edges of things. But the hardest part was the language. It was a wall between her and them. She learned the words for her work. Water, wood, fire, no. But the constant flow of conversation around her, the laughter, the arguments. It was all just noise. It made her loneliness a physical thing, a cold stone in her own chest that echoed the one she had seen in Nayati. She was losing herself. The woman who had liked piano music and poetry was vanishing. This new woman, this animal, was taking her place. This woman knew how to find the driest wood. This woman knew how to balance the water skin on her hip. This woman knew how to live with hunger. She saw Nayati. He was a phantom in her life. He would leave before sunrise to hunt. He would return at dusk, a deer or antelope over his shoulders. He would drop his kill near the butchering area, and then he would go to the small wickiup he kept, alone, at the far edge of the camp. He did not speak to her. He did not look at her. It was as if the night in the cabin had never happened. The man who had listened to her grief was gone. This was the warrior who had claimed her as property. He was her master, and he was ignoring her. The gratitude she had felt had curdled into a confused resentment. He had saved her life only to give her this non-life. But she watched him. She could not help it. She saw how the others, even Tato, deferred to him in matters of the hunt. She saw how he moved, with that silent, predator's grace. He was a part of this harsh land, and she was an ugly scar on it. Then things began to shift. It was not a sudden change, but a slow, subtle erosion. He began to see her. He would return from the hunt, and his eyes would for a brief second, find her where she was working. He saw her, barefoot in the buckskin shift, her hair matted with dust, her face sunburned. He saw her hands, which he remembered as soft and white, now raw, her knuckles split and bleeding. One day, he watched from the trees as she tried to lift a bundle of firewood that was too large for her. She struggled, her arms shaking. She dropped it. She sat down, her back to the camp, and he could see her shoulders shaking. But she made no sound. She was crying, but she was crying in the Apache way. In silence, so the enemy would not hear. He watched her for a full minute. He had expected her to break. He had expected this weak, white woman to wail, to give up, to die. But she was not dying. She was living. She was enduring a life that would kill most men. He saw the terror in her, but beneath it, he saw a sliver of hard, stubborn iron. It was the same strength he had, the will to put one foot in front of the other, even when your world was ash. He had not been wrong. In the cabin, she was not weak. She was a different kind of strong. That night, he returned with 2 rabbits. He passed the cabin where she sat, mending the shift with a bone needle and a piece of sinew Taza had thrown at her. He did not slow down. He did not look at her. But as he passed, he tossed one of the rabbits at her feet. Annie flinched, looking up, startled. He was already gone, his back to her, walking toward his own wickiup. She stared at the rabbit. It was fresh. It was his. It was food. It was his food. He was not letting her starve on scraps. She did not know what to do. She could not skin it. She had no knife. She sat there, her heart hammering. He had seen her. He had acknowledged her. A few days later, she was trying to scrape a deer hide. It was a disastrous attempt. The hide was stretched on a frame, and she was using a sharp stone tool. But she kept slipping, cutting holes in the valuable skin. Taza was screaming at her in Apache, her voice high with fury. Annie was blinking back tears of frustration and shame. The camp grew quiet. Nayati was there. He walked up, his shadow falling over her. Taza stopped yelling. Nayati looked at the ruined hide, and then at Annie. He took the scraper from her hand. He did not speak. He knelt. He turned her hand over, his fingers rough, and looked at the blisters and cuts. Then he took the scraper and, moving her hands, he showed her the angle, the pressure, how to pull, not push. He held her hands in his, forcing them to follow the correct motion. His touch was not gentle. It was hard, practical, but it was the first human touch she had felt in weeks that was not a blow. His skin was warm. Her entire arm was tingling. She was so focused on the feeling of his hand on hers that she barely understood the lesson. He made her do it, again and again, until the motion was less clumsy. Then he let her go. He stood up. He said something sharp to Taza. Taza looked furious, but she did not argue. Nayati walked away. Annie was left staring at the hide, her hands shaking, the place where he had touched her burning like a brand. Ta-Tu saw it all. He saw the rabbit. He saw the lesson at the hide. He saw the way Nayati's eyes lingered on her for a moment too long, and his heart hardened. He found Nayati by the horse corral, checking a hoof. "You teach her the work of an Indehi wife," Ta-Tu said. There was no greeting. Nayati did not look up. "I teach a captive to be useful, so she does not ruin our hides." "You gave her your own kill. You put your hands on her." "Her hands were weak. She could not work." Ta-Tu kicked the dirt. "You are a fool. Do you not see what you are doing? You look at her, and you forget who you are. You forget your son." Nayati straightened up slowly. His eyes were cold. "I told you, do not speak of him." "I will speak of him." Ta-Tu's voice was raw with his own pain, his own anger. "I will speak of him because you have forgotten him. You have replaced him with her. You have put this white woman in the place of your own blood. The camp sees it. They see you are weak. They see you have no honor left. She is a person, Nayati said, his voice dangerously low. She was alone, that is all. She is not a person, Tato shouted, and now others were looking. She is the enemy. She is the one who brought the soldiers. And you, my friend, you are lost. You are no longer Apache. You are just her guard. You have broken the harmony of this camp. You have put us all in danger for her. You have let her poison you. Nayati looked at Tato. He did not see his friend. He saw a man blinded by a hatred so simple and pure it was almost clean. He saw the rift between them. No longer a crack, but a canyon. Then you are not my friend, Nayati said, and I am not yours. He turned his back on Tato and walked away. Tato stood there, his fists clenched, his heart a cold, heavy stone. He had lost his friend. He had lost him to the ghost in the tattered buckskin shift. The camp was broken, and it was all her fault. He looked over at the cabin, where Annie was watching, terrified. He looked at her, and his eyes promised death. The rift between Nayati and Tato was a sickness in the camp. The harmony was broken. Warriors who had once been brothers now looked at each other with suspicion, forced to choose sides in a silent, bitter conflict. Tato's anger had solidified, becoming a cold, watchful presence. He made sure the other women shunned Annie completely. Her isolation was now absolute, a wall as real as the log cabin she slept in. This isolation forced her into greater risks. She had to venture farther and farther from the camp to find firewood, into the canyons and washes where the dead branches had not already been picked clean. She moved with a learned quickness, her eyes constantly scanning the rocks, her ears straining for any sound that was out of place. She had learned the terror of this land, but she had also learned its ways. She was no longer the soft woman who had cried by the river. She was a lean, hard creature, her skin brown from the sun, her hands calloused. Nayati watched her go. He watched her return. His days were a torment. He hunted, but his focus was split. Part of his mind was always on her, alone, vulnerable. He was trapped by his own decision. He had claimed her as his property, and in doing so, he had taken full responsibility for her life. But he had also cut himself off from his friend, from his people. He was as much an outcast as she was. He was the warrior, guarding his own self-imposed prison. One evening, the sky was a deep, bruised purple, the sun already behind the western peaks. Annie was late. She had gone to a dry arroyo, a mile from the camp, where a storm had knocked down a dead pine. The wood was dry and plentiful. She was gathering the last of her bundle, her back to the trail. When she heard the sound of shod horses, she froze. Apache horses were unshod. She dropped the wood and scrambled behind a cluster of boulders. Her heart was a cold stone in her chest. Two men rode into view. They were not soldiers. They were not Apache. They were white men, but of the hardest kind. They wore greasy leather vests and wide-brimmed hats, their faces covered in trail dust and beard. They carried rifles in saddle scabbards, and their eyes were small and mean. They were the dregs of the border, men who traded whiskey, guns, and, when they could get them, people. "Thought I seen something over here," one of them said, his voice a low growl. He dismounted, pulling his rifle. "Might be one of 'em squaws." The other man laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "A squaw'd be good, but a white gal, that'd be better. Worth $100 down in Sonora." They saw the abandoned bundle of wood. "We got one," the first man said. He raised his voice. "Come on out, little lady. We ain't gonna hurt you, much." Annie pressed herself into the rock. She held her breath, praying they would move on. The man chambered around. The click-clack was the loudest sound she had ever heard. "Last chance, or I start shooting into these rocks. Might get messy." She had a choice: stay and be shot, or come out and face something worse. She remembered the raiders who had taken her. This was the same. This was the nightmare. Returned. Nayati was returning from the hunt. A young buck slung over his shoulders. He was tired. He was angry. He was worried. She was not back. The light was failing. He had pushed himself, running the last mile, his moccasins silent on the game trail. He heard the man's voice. Pinda Likoyi. His tiredness vanished. The buck fell from his shoulders. He was not a man anymore. He was a weapon. His bow was in his hand. An arrow knocked before he had even taken a breath. He moved through the twilight like a ghost. He did not need to see. He knew this land. He heard the shuffle of the man's boots on the gravel. He heard the jingle of a spur. He saw the outline of the second man, still on his horse, a dark shape against the paler sky. "There!" the first man shouted. He had seen the flicker of her movement as she tried to press herself deeper into the shadow. "It's a woman. All right." He lunged toward the rocks. An arrow appeared in his throat. It made a sound, a thwack, like a wet piece of meat hitting a board. He stopped. His eyes went wide. He grabbed the shaft with both hands. A look of profound, stupid surprise on his face. He made a gurgling sound and fell forward. The man on the horse yelled, fumbling for his own rifle. "What in—" A second arrow took him in the chest, punching him clean off the saddle. He hit the ground with a heavy, final sound. The horse screamed, reared, and bolted into the darkness. Silence. The silence was absolute. It was deeper than the night. Annie was shaking so violently she could not stand. She peered from behind the boulder. The first man was twitching on the ground, a dark pool spreading around him. The second was still. Nayati stepped out of the shadows. He had not made a sound. He was just there. His face was a mask of cold, lethal rage. His knife was in his hand. He walked to the first man, who was still trying to breathe, and with one economical motion, he ended his suffering. He straightened up. He looked at the second man. He did not move. He stood over the bodies of the men he had just killed. He was breathing hard, not from exertion, but from the adrenaline, from the pure, killing fury. He turned his head. He looked at Annie. She was still huddled by the rock, her knuckles white, her eyes wide as saucers. She was looking at him, but she was not looking at him with terror. Not this time. She was looking at the man who had just saved her. She saw him, smeared with the blood of his work, standing in the twilight. An executioner. He was a savage. He was a killer. He was her captor. And she loved him. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. It was not gratitude. That was a small, pale thing. This was a deep, burning, impossible certainty. This man, this alien, this enemy of her people, was the only thing standing between her and a world of absolute horror. He had given her water. He had given her fire. He had given her food. He had given her his touch. And now, he had given her life, for the second time, bought with the lives of other men. He was the only person in the world who saw her, not as a white woman, not as a captive, but as a person, a creature worthy of the fight. He had seen her strength when she herself had only seen her weakness. He was her protector, and in that moment, he was the most beautiful and terrifying thing she had She pushed herself to her feet, her legs shaking. Nayati watched her. He saw the change in her face. He had expected terror, the same animal fear she had shown by the river. He saw that, but he saw something else beneath it. He saw the look from the cabin, the look of recognition, but this was deeper. It was a look of complete, raw, unguarded acceptance. It unnerved him more than the fight had. He walked over to her. He was still holding the bloody knife. He stood in front of her. He was so close she could feel the heat coming off him, smell the sweat and the metallic tang of blood. "You are hurt," he said. It was not a question. She looked down. Her arm was bleeding. She must have scraped it on the rock. She had not even felt it. He took her arm. His grip was rough. He examined the cut. It was not deep. He let her go. He turned, wiped his knife on the dead man's vest, and sheathed it. He picked up his bow. He looked at her. "Come," he said. He did not retrieve his arrows. He would get them in the morning. He started walking back toward the camp, not waiting to see if she followed. Annie stood for one more second, looking at the dead men. Then she turned and ran to catch up. She did not bother with the wood. She walked behind him, her eyes fixed on the strong, straight line of his back. She had never been more terrified in her life, not of the dead men, but of the feeling in her own heart. It was a forbidden thing. It was madness. He was an Apache warrior. She was a white bride. His people hated her. Her people would hang him. This love was a death sentence. They walked into the camp in silence. The people saw them. They saw Nayati, his face like a thunderhead. They saw the woman walking behind him, her arm bleeding, her face pale but her eyes strange, fixed on him. They saw the fresh blood on his leggings. Tato saw. He saw, and his heart turned to stone. Nayati had killed for her. He had killed white men, not to protect the people, but to protect her. Nayati walked Annie to her cabin. He stopped at the door. She stopped, too, looking up at him. The firelight from the camp flickered on his face. She wanted to say something. "Thank you," but the words were so small, so stupid, they were useless. He looked down at her. He saw the adoration in her eyes. It was plain. It was undisguised. It was the last thing in the world he wanted to see. It was a complication that went beyond a simple captive. It was a chain. He turned, his face hardening, and left her. He walked to his own wickiup and ducked inside. He sat in the darkness. He did not build a fire. He was shaking. He had killed white men before. Many times, he had killed soldiers. But this was different. He had not killed them as enemies of the Inde. He had killed them because they were touching her. His loyalty, his code, his duty to his people. He had lived by these things. They were the bones of his life. And he had just realized, in that arroyo, that he would let them all burn. He would let them all break. He looked at his hands, the hands that had avenged his family. And he knew he would have killed Apache too. If Tato had tried to harm her, he would have killed him. He was a warrior. His duty was to his people. But his heart, the frozen, dead thing in his chest, had begun to beat again. And it was beating for her, for the white woman, the enemy. He thought of his wife. He thought of his son. He closed his eyes, waiting for the familiar, agonizing guilt. It came, but it was different. It was dull. It was a memory. The raw, living, immediate need to protect Annie. It was stronger. It was a betrayal of his dead. It was a betrayal of his people. He sat in the dark, a man divided, a man who had just discovered that his own heart was a traitor. He was loyal to his tribe, but he loved a woman his tribe had condemned. He knew, with a cold, terrible certainty, that a choice was coming, and he did not know if he had the strength to make it. The horse that had fled the arroyo was the tribe's death warrant. It was found 3 days later, wandering by a cavalry patrol. The saddle, the brand, and the shod hooves told a clear story. The dead men, when they were discovered, told the rest. The soldiers were not fools. They knew who used arrows like that. They knew this was Apache territory. The presence of dead white men, even slavers, was the only excuse they needed. They had been hunting for this band for months. Now, they had a scent. The attack came at dawn, just as it had come for Nayati's family, so many years ago. The first warning was not a sound, but a feeling, a tremor. The camp was still asleep, wrapped in the cold pre-dawn mist. Nayati, who had not truly slept in nights, was outside his wickiup. He felt it through his moccasins. The ground was vibrating. Horses, many horses, moving fast. He lifted his head, and then he heard it. Not the jingle of spurs, but the faint, metallic ring of carbines, the rumble of a column. "They come!" His voice was not a shout, it was a roar. "Soldiers, they come!" The camp exploded. It was a hive kicked open. People stumbled from their wiki-ups, naked and half asleep. Children began to cry. Dogs barked in a frenzy. "To the rocks, to the high ground!" Tato was already there, his voice cutting through the panic, organizing the warriors. "Hold them! Give the families time!" Nayati did not move toward Tato. His first, only thought was for her. He sprinted across the clearing to the log cabin. He ripped the door open. Annie was already on her feet, her face a mask of white terror. The sounds of her past nightmare come to life again. "Soldiers," he said. He grabbed her arm. "You run, with the women, to the rocks. Do not stop. Do not look back." He pushed her out of the cabin, shoved her toward the stream of women and children already scrambling up the canyon path. Then the first shots came. A volley of rifle fire ripped through the camp from the south. The bugle call, a high, terrible sound, sliced the air. "Charge!" The soldiers burst from the trees, their blue uniforms dark in the gray light, their horses crashing through the brush. They were firing from the saddle. "Hold the line!" Tato yelled. He and a dozen warriors, Nayati among them, formed a desperate, thin screen of defense. Arrows thwacked into the charging line. A horse screamed and went down. A soldier clutched his chest and fell. But there were too many. They were a wave of blue, a relentless, disciplined machine. "Fall back to the canyon mouth," Tato shouted, firing an arrow. Nayati moved with them, fighting with a cold, precise fury. He was a part of the whole, a warrior of the people. He fired, took cover, fired again. His mind was split. One half was the warrior, counting soldiers, watching their movements, protecting his brothers. The other half was scanning the fleeing crowd of non-combatants, searching for a single buckskin shift, for a head of pale, sun-dried hair. He saw her. She was not with the other women. She was frozen. She had been running, but the sight of the blue uniforms, the men who were her people, had stopped her. She was standing alone, in the middle of the clearing, trapped between the Apache warriors and the charging soldiers. "Annie!" he screamed. The name felt foreign, ripped from his throat. She turned to him. Her face was a picture of pure, agonizing confusion. A group of soldiers saw her. They were the ones who had broken through the line. Their officer, a young, eager lieutenant. "Hold your fire!" the lieutenant yelled. Reining in his horse, he saw her. A white woman, in buckskin. "It's a captive. They've got a white woman." To him, this was not a battle. It was a rescue. This was the proof they needed, the justification. "Save her, get the woman," he ordered. 3 soldiers dismounted and ran toward her. Annie looked at them, at their outstretched hands, their white faces. They were her people. They were her saviors. And she screamed. She screamed, not in relief but in terror. She turned away from them. She looked at Nayati. No Nayati. She began to run, not toward the soldiers, but toward him. The soldiers, stunned by this, grabbed her. One man tackled her, pulling her to the ground. She fought him, kicking and scratching. A wild thing. "No, let me go, Nayati." The lieutenant watched, his face hardening. The woman was crazed, broken by the savages. "Tie her hands, get her on a horse, we're taking her back." Nayati saw it all. He saw her fight. He saw them subdue her, pulling her arms behind her back, dragging her toward their horses. He was on the ridge, beside Tato. The battle was raging. The warriors were holding, but just barely. They were buying seconds with their blood. "Nayati," Tato yelled, pulling another arrow from his quiver. "They are flanking us. From the north, we must hold the pass." or the women are lost. Nayati did not hear him. He was not in the battle. He was not on the ridge. He was in a small, dark cabin, listening to a woman cry. He was in an arroyo, watching her face as he killed for her. He saw the soldier lift her, throwing her across the front of his saddle. He saw her, bound and helpless, being carried away. Nayati Tato screamed, grabbing his arm, "Brother, fight our people." Nayati looked at Tato. He looked at his friend's face, a mask of desperation, courage, and fear. He looked at the warriors beside him, his brothers. He looked at the canyon pass, where his people were fleeing for their lives. This was his duty. This was his blood. This was his oath. He heard her voice. One last, desperate cry, carried on the wind. "Nayati!" He turned his back on Tato. He turned his back on the battle. He turned his back on his people. "No," Tato whispered. He grabbed Nayati's shoulder. "Brother, no, do not do this. They are our people." Nayati shoved him off. The look on his face was not one of a warrior. It was the look of a man who was already dead. A man with nothing left to lose but one single thing. He broke from the defensive line. He leaped from the ridge, sliding down the scree slope in a cloud of dust. He was not running from the soldiers. He was running at them, but not at the main line. He was running toward the small group, the lieutenant and his men, who were already pulling back with their prize. "Traitor!" Tato's voice was a raw wound, a sound of agony that was worse than any bullet. "Traitor!" Nayati did not look back. He ran. He was one man, in the open. The soldiers saw him. "It's one of them. He's coming for the woman." They fired. Bullets kicked up dust around his feet. He did not slow. He was not a warrior. Using cover, he was an arrow, aimed at a single target. He ran with a speed born of pure, desperate need. But he was too late. The soldiers were on horseback. The lieutenant, with Annie slung in front of him, spurred his horse. They galloped away, crashing back into the trees, leaving the battle behind. Nayati stopped. He was alone in the middle of the field. The battle raged on the ridge above him. His people were fighting and dying, and he was not with them. He had failed them. He sank to his knees. The dust settled around him. He had lost his honor. He had lost his tribe, and he had lost her. Then the rage came. It was not the cold rage of the warrior. It was a hot, black, personal fury. They had taken her. They had taken the last part of his soul. He stood up. He turned his face, not to the ridge where his people fought, but to the forest where the soldiers had vanished. He had made his choice. He had betrayed his blood. He would not betray her. He began to run. He did not run to the fight. He ran into the trees, following the tracks of the shod horses. He was no longer a warrior defending his people. He was a hunter, and he was hunting. Night fell. The sounds of the battle had long since faded. He did not know if his people had escaped. He did not know if Tato was alive or dead. He did not allow himself to think of it. To think of it was to go mad. He could only think of one thing: her. He found their camp. It was a small, temporary posting, a circle of fires, with sentries. They were confident. They had won. They had scattered the Apache, and they had rescued the white woman. Nayati lay on a ridge above them, his belly in the dirt. He watched. Annie was tied to a wagon wheel. Her head was bowed. She had not been harmed. The lieutenant had brought her a blanket and a tin cup of coffee. He was trying to talk to her. "Ma'am, you're safe now. My name is Lieutenant Harris. We'll have you back to Fort Bowie by tomorrow. You're safe." Annie did not look at him. She was silent. She was a stone. "Ma'am?" He gently touched her shoulder. "Did you hear me? You're free." She looked at him. Her eyes were dead. "You are?" she whispered. "The man who just destroyed my life." The lieutenant recoiled, confused. "Ma'am, those savages, they had you captive." They were not, she said, her voice flat.
The ones who captured me.
She looked away. The lieutenant, baffled and offended, left her, chalking it up to shock. Nayati watched. He saw her despair. He saw her, tied like an animal. He saw the ring of soldiers, 20 men armed with rifles. He saw the sentries, walking their patrols. To go in there was death. A warrior did not do this. A warrior did not throw his life away for nothing. This was a white man's fight, a foolish, emotional charge. He checked his knife. He had his bow and a quiver with a dozen arrows. He was not a warrior tonight. He had given up that name when he had turned his back on Tato. He was just the man who had sat in a cabin, listening to a woman cry. He was the man who had taught her to scrape a hide. He was the man who had killed for her. He was going in. He was not going to fight 20 men. He was going to kill one, the one guarding her. And then, in the chaos, they would slip away. He fixed his gaze on the sentry who walked nearest the wagon. He counted his steps. He timed his turn. He looked at the shadows, finding the darkest path. He began to move. He was a snake, a whisper of wind, a shadow moving within shadows. He was violating every rule of his people, every tenet of his old life. He was doing it for her. He was doing it because, in a world where he had lost everything, she was the only thing left. His loyalty was no longer to a tribe, or a land, or a past. It was to her. He would save her, or he would die beside that wagon wheel. There was no other choice. Nayati was a creature of the earth. He lay on his belly, feeling the cold of the ground seep into him, a cold that matched the ice in his own veins. He was not a man. He was a purpose. He watched the camp below. He watched the ring of fires, the dark shapes of sleeping soldiers, the horses tethered in a line, and he watched the one man, the sentry, who walked the patch of darkness between the firelight and the wagon wheel where Annie was tied. He counted the man's steps, 30 paces toward the horses. A pause, a turn, 30 paces back. The man was bored, cold, and confident. He carried his rifle at a slope, his attention wandering. When he turned his back, there was a space of perhaps 10 seconds when his gaze was pointed away, and the light from the nearest fire cast a deep shadow behind a stack of supply crates. Nayati had his path. He had his timing. He unslung his bow. He did not have a target for it. Not yet. The bow was for the next man. The one who would shout. The first man, the sentry, was for the knife. To use an arrow was to leave a clue. To use a knife was silent. He drew the long, heavy blade from its sheath. He tested the edge with his thumb. It was sharp as a whisper. He put his bow on the ground, a silent promise to retrieve it if he lived. He needed both hands free. He began to move. He did not crawl. He flowed. He was a patch of moving darkness, sliding over the rock, down the incline. He moved when the wind rustled the pines, his small sounds covered by the larger. He reached the bottom of the ridge and was in the flat darkness of the camp's perimeter. He paused, motionless, for a full minute, listening. The snoring of the men, the sigh of a horse, the crackle of the fire. The sentry reached the end of his path, near the wagon wheel. He stopped. He looked at Annie. She was a dark, huddled shape, her head bowed. The soldier sighed, perhaps a sound of pity, or perhaps just boredom. He turned. He began his 30 paces away from her. Nayati moved. He was not a man. He was a cougar. He covered the 50 feet of open ground in a blur of silent speed. He did not run upright. He was low, his body parallel to the ground, a four-legged shadow. The soldier heard nothing. He felt a hand, hard as iron, clamp over his mouth, stifling his cry. He felt an arm lock around his chest, pinning his own arms. He was lifted from his feet. He felt a single, cold, sharp sting in his side, under his ribs, a blinding, upward thrust. His body went rigid. The hand released his mouth. He could not scream. He could not breathe. Nayati held him upright, the knife still deep, until the man's body went limp. Nayati lowered the soldier to the ground, laying him gently in the shadow as if he were putting a child to bed. He pulled his knife free. The man was dead before he hit the dust. He was at the wagon wheel. Annie looked up, her eyes wide and luminous in the firelight, saw him. She made a sound, a small gasp, half scream, half sob. Nayati put his hand on her mouth, gently this time. "Quiet," he whispered. The English word was stark. "We go." His knife, still wet, sliced through the ropes at her wrists. He pulled her to her feet. She was stiff, her legs numb. She stumbled. "Nayati," she whispered, her voice choked. "You came." "Quiet. Run. To the trees, where we watched." He pointed into the blackness of the ridge. "Go, now." He gave her a shove. She began to run, half stumbling, half crawling, toward the darkness. "Hey!" The shout came from the other side of the fire. Another sentry. He had seen the movement. "Sergeant, someone's by the prisoner." Nayati did not run with her. He ran the other way, toward the tethered horses. He was the distraction. He had to buy her time. "Halt, halt, or I'll shoot!" Nayati grabbed the pin from a saddle, pulling a carbine free from its boot. He did not know how to fire it. Not really. It was a club. He turned. The sentry was raising his rifle. Nayati threw the carbine like a spear. It spun end over end, striking the soldier in the chest, knocking him backward with a grunt. The camp was exploding. Men were rolling from their blankets, grabbing for weapons, shouting in confusion. "What is it?" "Indians." "Where?" "The horses," Nayati roared. In Apache. He sprinted down the picket line, his knife flashing, slicing the tethers of the panicked animals. Horses screamed, reared, and bolted, charging through the camp. It was chaos. Men were shouting, diving out of the way of the stampeding animals. Tents were trampled. A horse crashed through a fire, scattering sparks and burning logs. "To the woman, find the woman." The voice was the lieutenant, Harris. He had his pistol in his hand. He saw Nayati, a dark figure among the frantic horses. "There he is! Shoot him!" Nayati used the horses as a shield. A pistol flashed, the bullet whining past his ear. He saw Annie, a frozen shape at the edge of the camp, 30 yards away, too terrified to move. "Run!" he screamed. "Annie, run!" He broke from the horses, running toward her. He had to get to her. There by the wagon, a soldier knelt, took aim, and fired. Nayati felt a white-hot poker stab him in the left side, just above his hip. The force of it spun him around, and he fell to one knee. The world went gray for a second. The sounds of the camp became a dull roar. He looked down. There was a dark, wet stain spreading on his buckskin leggings. It was bad. He knew it. "I got him, he's hit," the soldier yelled. Triumphant. "Nayati!" Annie's scream cut through the haze. Seeing him fall had broken her paralysis. She was running back to him. "No," he choked, pushing himself up. The pain was a blinding sheet of fire. "Go!" She reached him. She grabbed his arm, pulling him up. "You are shot! You are shot!" She was frantic. "It is nothing," he lied, his teeth clenched. He put his arm over her shoulder, using her as a crutch. They were exposed. They were in the firelight. "Surrender." Lieutenant Harris was there, not 10 yards away, his pistol leveled at Nayati's chest. "Let her go. Damn you. It's over." Nayati looked at him. He saw the face of the man who had taken her. He shoved Annie behind him, shielding her with his own wounded body. He still had his knife. He would die here, but he would take this man with him. "Stay back," Nayati growled, his voice a low, animal sound. "He's hit, Lieutenant," another soldier said, coming up. "Just shoot him." Harris hesitated. He did not want to shoot the savage in front of the woman. It was not civilized. Give her up. I give you my word. You will be treated. Before he could finish, Annie did something no one expected. She lunged past Nayati, grabbing a burning branch from the scattered fire. She shrieked, a sound of pure, feral rage, and swung the brand at the lieutenant's face. Harris cried out, throwing his arm up. The flames licked at his sleeve. He stumbled back, his pistol firing wild as he fell. That was the chance. Nayati grabbed Annie's hand.
Now?
He ran. He ignored the fire in his side. He ignored the shouts. He ran, dragging her with him, into the blessed, absolute darkness of the trees. They scrambled up the ridge, Nayati's blood leaving a dark trail on the rocks. They're getting away. After them. Shots followed them, bullets thudding into the trees, whining off the rocks. But it was a blind pursuit. The soldiers were disorganized, half-dressed, their horses scattered. They were firing at shadows. Nayati did not stop. He ran, and he pulled her with him. He was a man possessed, running on nothing but will. The pain was an ocean, and he was drowning in it. But he kept his feet moving. He knew this land. He knew the hidden places. They ran for miles. They ran until the sounds of the pursuit faded, until the only sounds were their own ragged gasps and the pound of their feet on the hard earth. Finally, Nayati's legs gave out. The fire in his side had consumed him. He stumbled, pitched forward, and collapsed, pulling Annie down with him. They were in a deep wash, a dry riverbed, sheltered by sheer rock walls and overgrown with mesquite. They were hidden. They were, for a moment, safe. Nayati, Annie was sobbing, turning him over. Her hands came away black with his blood. The front of her shift was soaked in it. He was pale, his skin clammy. He was breathing in short, shallow gasps. His eyes were half closed. "You are hurt," she said, her voice trembling. "It is bad. It is so bad." He looked at her. He managed a faint grimace. You fight," he whispered, a shadow of a smile. "With fire." "Do not talk," she said, frantic. She tore a long strip from the hem of her buckskin shift. It was not enough. She ripped at her own sleeve. "We have to stop the bleeding. Oh, God, we have to stop it." She wadded the buckskin, pressing it hard against the wound in his side. He cried out, a sharp, choked sound, his body arching in pain. "I am sorry. I am sorry." She wept, but she did not lessen the pressure. She was the one who was strong. Now, she was the one holding him together. He lay there, his head in her lap, looking up at her. The moon was a sliver, and the stars were cold and bright. The woman he had saved, the weak, crying creature, was now pressing her hands into his wound, her face a mask of fierce, desperate determination. He had saved her, and he had paid for it. He had rescued her from her people. He had turned his back on his own. He was a traitor. He was bleeding to death in a ditch, and he had never, in his entire hard life, felt a moment of such profound and terrible peace. The world was reduced to the sharp, coppery smell of his blood and the agonizing sound of his breathing. Annie kept her hands pressed to the wound, her own body numb, her mind a blank wall of terror. He was dying. She was holding him, and he was dying. "Nayati," she whispered, her voice cracking. You cannot stay here. You will freeze." His eyes fluttered open. The pain had pulled him deep inside himself, but he heard her. "Leave me," he rasped. "Go, find your people. It is done." No, the word was not a plea. It was a command. It was the iron she had found in herself. I will not leave you, not after—" She could not finish. "Not after you gave up everything." "Annie," he said, his voice a thread. "I am a dead man. I have no people. You have no people. Go!" "On your feet," she ordered, her voice shaking but hard. "Get up! Get up!" She put her arms under his, trying to lift him. It was like trying to lift a mountain. He was a dead weight, his body limp. "I cannot," he whispered. "You will," she said. She put her mouth close to his ear, her tears hot on his cold skin. "You did not let me die by the river. You did not let me freeze in the cabin. I will not let you die in this ditch. You will get up." Maybe it was her words. Maybe it was the last defiant spark of his own will. He gritted his teeth, a low groan tearing from his throat, and pushed with his good leg. He got to one knee, his body trembling with the agony of the movement. She was his crutch. She looped his arm over her shoulders, taking his full weight on her small frame. He was so tall. He leaned on her, and her knees buckled, but she did not fall. "Now," she panted, "walk." And so they began. It was not a walk. It was a staggering, agonizing lurch. They moved a few feet at a time. Nayati was half conscious, his feet dragging, his blood still seeping, soaking her shoulder, her side. Every step was a fresh wave of fire. Annie was crying, but they were silent, scalding tears of pure, desperate effort. She was moving a dying man through a hostile wilderness, in the dark, with an army hunting them. She did not know how long they walked. An hour, 2. The moon moved across the sky. They followed the wash, staying in the deep shadow, moving toward the high, broken country, away from the soldiers, away from the ruin of the camp. Nayati was fading. His breathing was shallower. He was stumbling more, his weight becoming impossible. "I must rest," he murmured, his head sinking. "No," she said, "not here, not yet." And then she saw it. Tucked into a fold of the canyon, barely visible, was a shape that did not belong. It was a line, a square. It was a structure. It was another cabin. It was tiny, barely a hut, built of rock and scavenged lumber, probably by some long-forgotten prospector or trapper. It was a burrow, a hole in the earth. It was salvation. "There," she gasped, using her last strength to pull him. "Nayati, look, there." They fell against the door. It was not locked. It was barely on its hinges. She pushed it open, and they collapsed inside, onto a floor of cold, hard-packed dirt. She was sobbing with relief. She let him slide gently to the floor. The cabin was dark, smelling of dust, animal droppings, and the faint, cold scent of ash. There was a crude fireplace, just like the other one. "Stay," she whispered, though he could not move. Her hands were shaking. Her body was screaming with exhaustion, but she moved. She found the tinderbox the prospector had left, rusted but functional. She found a few dry, forgotten sticks of wood in a corner. She built a fire. The small, one-room space flickered to life. It was a miserable, tiny hole, but it was shelter. It was warm. She turned to him. In the firelight, she saw how bad it was. He was pale as ash, his lips blue. The makeshift bandage was soaked through. She laid him flat. "This will hurt," she said, her voice small. "I'm sorry." She pulled the wadded buckskin away. The blood welled up, dark and sluggish. She took the last of her torn shift and pressed it in. Hard. He did not cry out this time. He just went rigid, his breath hissing through his teeth. She had to do more. The bleeding was inside. She knew it, but she had to clean it. "Water," she said. She looked around, frantic. There was a bucket in the corner. She ran outside, finding the small, half-frozen stream the prospector had built by. She filled the bucket, her hands numb. She came back. She ripped another piece of her shift. She washed the wound, her touch as gentle as she could make it, cleaning away the dirt and the blood. He watched her, his eyes dark with pain. He did not flinch. When it was clean, she bound it. She used the last of her rags, pulling the bandage tight, wincing as she heard his sharp intake of breath. It was not enough. It would never be enough. She sat back on her heels. She had done all she could.
The fire crackled. Outside, the wind cried. He was alive. He was breathing. But he was terribly, terribly wounded.
She lay down on the dirt floor beside him, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion. She was not his captive. She was not his savior. She was just his. She put her head on his shoulder, his good shoulder, and wrapped her arm around his chest, as if she could hold him to life through her own body. And, for the first time since she had been taken, she fell into a deep and dreamless sleep. She awoke to the light. He was watching her. The gray morning light filled the cabin. The fire was embers. He was still pale, but the pain in his eyes was sharper. He was awake. He was himself. "You should have gone," he said. His voice was a dry croak. Annie sat up. She felt the dried blood on her skin, a stiff, terrible crust. "And go where?" she asked. "To the soldiers." She stared at him. "To them? They are my people. I know. And I attacked their lieutenant with fire. I am the crazed white woman, the one who turned savage. What do you think they would do to me? Put me in a fine dress and send me home. I have no home. They would put me in an asylum." "It is better," he said, "than this, than me." "Better than you?" "I am a traitor," he said. His voice was flat, empty. All the pain of the night before, all the pain of his life, packed into those 3 words. "My people, they fought. I ran. I turned my back on my brother. Tato, I let them die, to chase you. I have no honor. I have no tribe. I am nothing. I am a ghost." "You are not a ghost," she said, her voice fierce. She touched his face, her hand, rough and calloused, against his cold skin. "You are the man who saved me." "I saved you," he grimaced, trying to sit up, and failing. "And I have killed you. What life is this? We are hunted. My people, if they live, will hunt me as a traitor. Your people will hunt me as a murderer. And you are tied to me. I have given you a death sentence." He was right. The truth of it settled on them, cold and heavy as the stone walls of the cabin. Their love was not a refuge. It was a battlefield. They were trapped, caught between 2 worlds, and both worlds wanted them dead. "You must leave," he said. His voice was urgent now. He gripped her hand, his fingers surprisingly strong. "Take what is here. Go east. Find a town. Change your name. Forget me. Forget all of this. It is the only way." "Forget you," she said, her voice a whisper. "You think I can do that? You think I can walk away? You must. To stay with me is to die." Annie looked at him. She looked at this man, broken, bleeding, who had sacrificed his entire world for her. The man who had seen her strength when she was weak. The man who had listened to her grief. The man whose heart, she now realized, was fused to her own. "You are right," she said. His eyes closed for a moment, a flicker of, was it relief or more pain? "You are right," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "It is a death sentence. To stay with you is to be hunted, to be an outcast, to live in fear every single day." She leaned closer until her face was inches from his. "And I accept it," she said. His eyes flew open. "Annie, no, you listen. What life did you save me for, to go back to them, to be a curiosity, a broken thing for them to pity? I am not that woman anymore. I am not the woman who came here. You changed me. This land changed me. I am a woman who knows how to find wood and water. I am a woman who fights with fire, and I am a woman who loves you." The word hung in the small cabin. Love. It was the first time it had been spoken. "You are my people," she said, her voice thick with tears, but her gaze steady. "You are my tribe. You are my home. I do not care if the whole world is at war with us. I do not care if we are hunted. I will not leave you. I cannot live without you. So, you can die here. In this cabin. Or you can live. You can live for me, but you will not send me away." He stared at her. He stared at her for a long, long time. The fire in his own eyes, the one he thought had died with his family, the one he thought had been frozen by his grief, began to burn. He saw her, not the white woman, not the captive.
He saw Annie,
He raised his hand, his good hand, and touched her cheek. His thumb brushed away a tear. "They will hunt us," he whispered.
"Let them,"
she whispered back. "We will have no home." "We will have this," she said, putting her hand over his.
"We will have each other."
He pulled her down to him, his arm going around her, and he kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was desperate and raw. It tasted of blood and ash and smoke and loss. It was the taste of their world. It was a seal, a promise. They had no tribe. They had no allies. They had nothing but the clothes on their backs, a dying fire, and a wound that might still kill him. The entire world was their enemy. But as they held each other in the cold morning light, in a broken-down cabin in the middle of nowhere, they were not afraid. They were, finally, together. And that was enough. The first days in the rock cabin were a blur of fever and ice. Nayate's life hung by a single, frayed thread. The bullet had torn through his side, and while it had missed his vital organs, it had left a ragged, open channel that his body did not know how to close. The wound was hot to the touch, the edges of it red and swollen. The fever came on the second day. He drifted. He was a ghost, floating in a red haze of pain. He was back in his first life. He saw his son, a small boy, laughing as he chased a rabbit. He saw his wife, her face kind, her hands grinding corn. He smelled the familiar smoke of his own wickiup. Then the smoke would turn acrid, the sky would turn black, and the soldiers would come. He would cry out, a low, animal sound, and thrash, his hand reaching for a knife that was not there. Then he would surface, pulled from the nightmare. He would be in the tiny, dark cabin, and Annie would be there. Her face, thin and pale, would be hovering over him. She would be pressing a wet, cold rag to his forehead. Her hands, which he remembered as soft, were now chapped and raw.
"It is all right,"
she would whisper, her voice hoarse.
"It is just a dream. You are safe."
He was not safe. He was a helpless child, being tended by a woman he had stolen. The shame of his weakness was as sharp as the pain in his side. He was a warrior. He provided. He protected. Now, he was a burden. He was a piece of meat, lying on a dirt floor, unable to even fetch his own water. Annie was not a nurse. She was a survivor. She did not weep. She did not panic. She worked. She had his knife. She had his strength. She used every lesson she had learned in her brutal captivity. She found the rusted traps the prospector had left. And though she wept the first time she had to kill a snared rabbit, she did it. She found the wild onions and bitter roots she had seen the Apache women gather. She kept the fire low, but constant. She boiled water over and over to clean his wound. The infection peaked on the 4th day. He was delirious, speaking in the Apache tongue, arguing with a shadow. He was arguing with Ta-To. "She is my captive," he muttered, his voice thick. "She is my right." Annie saw the wound. It was seeping, the flesh around it a dark, angry purple. She knew, with a cold certainty, that if she did not act, he would be dead by morning. She boiled water until it was scalping. She tore the last clean strip from her shift.
"Nayati,"
she said, her voice shaking but hard. "This will hurt. You must hold still." He was too weak to fight. She cleaned the wound. She had to open it, to press the hot, clean cloth deep, to drain the poison. He screamed. It was a high, thin sound that tore her heart in two. But she did not stop. She held him down with one arm, and she cleaned the wound with the other, her face a mask of tears and sweat, until the sickness had drained, and only clean. Red blood followed. She bound him again. He was unconscious. He had fainted from the pain. She sat, her entire body shaking, and watched him. She had done it. She had hurt him to save him. He slept for a full day. The fever broke. When he woke, his eyes were clear. The pain was still there. A sharp, clean fire, but the red haze was gone. He looked at her. She was asleep, sitting up, her head against the cold stone wall, her face smudged with soot and exhaustion. He saw the rabbit snares in the corner. He saw the small pile of roots. He saw the clean bandage on his side. He had been wrong about her from the first. He had seen her as weak, a crier. He had seen her as stubborn. He had seen her as strong. But he had not seen this. She was a warrior. She had fought death. In this cabin, with no weapons but her own will, she had fought for him. He did not wake her. He lay there and watched her sleep, and the last of the ice around his heart, the ice that his son's death had built, melted and broke. His old life was gone. His tribe was gone. His honor, as he knew it, was gone. This woman was all that was left, and she was enough. It was 2 more weeks before he could stand, 2 weeks of her hunting, her feeding him broth, her guarding him while he slept. He was thin, a shadow of the man he had been, and the scar on his side was a puckered, angry rope, but he was alive. One morning, he stood up, and he did not follow Wobbleter. He walked to the door of the cabin and looked out. The air was cold, sharp. The land was waiting. "We must go," he said. "Where?" Annie came to stand beside him. "The soldiers." "No, not yet. I must go back." "Back?" Her blood went cold. "To the Camp Nayati, no. It is death. They will be there." "I must see," he said. His voice was quiet. "I must know." She understood. He had to know the cost of his choice. He had to know what had happened to his people, to Tato. The journey was slow. He was weak. He leaned on her. But this time, he was walking. They moved like ghosts, traveling the high ridges, avoiding the main trails. It took them a full day to cover the distance they had once run in an hour. They reached the ridge overlooking the canyon. They lay on their bellies and looked down. The camp was gone. It was a place of silence and ash. The wickiups were burned, black circles on the earth. The log cabin, her first prison, was a pile of charred timbers. The soldiers had been thorough. Nayati's face was stone. He scanned the ground. He was reading the story. He saw the tracks of the shod horses. He saw the brass casings from their carbines. He saw the signs of the fight. "They held them," he whispered, his voice thick. He pointed to the canyon mouth, where he had left them. "Here, Tato." He held the pass, the tracks, the women, the children. They went north. They got away. A wave of relief, so profound it was almost grief, washed over him. His people were alive. His betrayal had not doomed them. "They are gone," Annie said, touching his arm. "We can go." "Wait," he said. He slid down the embankment, into the ruined camp. He walked through the ashes of his old life. He walked to the place where his wickiup had been. There was nothing. He walked to the place where Tato had lived. And he found it. It was a broken arrow, stuck in the earth. It was not a soldier's arrow. It was Tato's. The fletching was his sign, and it was broken in half. It was a message, not for the soldiers, for him. It was the sign of a man who is no longer a brother. It was the sign of a man who is cast out. It meant you are dead to us. You are a ghost. Do not follow. Nayati stood, looking at the broken arrow. For a long time, Tato was alive. His friend was alive, and he had excommunicated him from his own life, from his own people. The door was not just closed, it was sealed. He turned, his face unreadable. He walked back to Annie. He did not tell her what he had seen. He did not have to. She saw it in his eyes. "It is finished," he said. He was a man without a tribe. He had no people. He had no home. He had only her. They traveled east. They walked for weeks, hiding by day, moving by night. They left the high, clean rock of his homeland and entered the dirty, scarred foothills of the white world. They were aiming for a small, raw mining town called Penal Forks, a place Nayati knew of, a place where the chaos of new money meant people did not ask questions. The town was a wound in the earth. It was a muddy street lined with canvas tents, a few false-fronted saloons, and a general store that sold flour, bacon, and whiskey at outrageous prices. The sound of hammering and the distant boom of dynamite was constant. They did not enter the town. They found a small, abandoned line shack, much like the one they had healed in, a mile up the canyon. It was their new home. The next day, Nayati took his bow, which he had retrieved from the ridge above the soldiers' camp. He went into the hills. He returned with 2 deer. He walked into the town, to the butcher's shop. The butcher, a large man with a bloody apron, looked at the Apache warrior, at his knife, at his bow. Then he looked at the deer. They were clean kills. "How much?" the butcher asked. "Flour." Nayati said, "Coffee, salt." The butcher grunted. It was good meat. He gave him the supplies. It was a fair trade. Annie took the second deerskin. She had scraped it, the way he had taught her. She took it to the general store. The owner, a thin man with suspicious eyes, looked at her. He saw her buckskin shift, her matted hair, her sun-darkened skin. He saw the way she walked, barefoot. "What you want?" he snapped. "Thread," she said, "a needle, soap." He looked at the hide. It was well scraped. He took it and shoved the items at her. "Get on out!" This became their life. He was the hunter. She was the tanner, the mender. She took in laundry from the miners, washing their filthy, sweat-stiffened clothes in the cold stream. They were the ghosts of Penal Forks. The miners called him Injun. They called her Squaw. The women of the town, the few decent ones, pulled their skirts aside when she passed. They were pariahs. They were treated with a mixture of fear and contempt. The miners respected Nayati's ability to provide meat, but they hated him for his blood. They looked at Annie with a different, fouler kind of hunger, and with a deep scorn. A white woman, gone native. She was the lowest thing. One evening, Annie was returning from the store, a small bag of beans in her hand. A group of drunken miners blocked her path. "Evening, little squaw," one of them slurred. "You tired of that redskin want to see what a real white man feels like?" He grabbed her arm. Annie did not scream. She did not hesitate. She dropped the beans and brought her knee up, hard, into his groin. The man howled, collapsing. His friends, stunned, moved forward. "Why, you—" A shadow fell over them. Nayati was there. He had been watching, from the rocks. He did not have his bow. He just had his knife. He did not say a word. He just looked at them. His eyes were the old eyes, the cold eyes of the hunter. The miners were drunk, but they were not stupid. They knew that look. This was not a fight. This was a killing. "Easy, Chief," one of them mumbled, backing away, dragging his wounded friend. "Just funny." They scrambled away. Annie was shaking, her hand pressed to her mouth. Nayati picked up the bag of beans. He looked at her, and then at the retreating men. That night, they sat outside their shack. The town was a smear of ugly yellow light below them. The sound of a tinny piano and drunken shouts floating up. Nayati was sharpening his knife. The old anger was in him. The need to protect, the need to kill. This world was just like the other, full of enemies. "I cannot stay here," he said, his voice low. "These men, they look at you." "And where will we go?" Annie asked. She was not crying. Her voice was just tired. "It will be the same everywhere, or worse. They will put you on a reservation. Or hang you. They will put me in a home." He was right. There was no place. He looked at his hands. He was a warrior, a hunter, but his skills were useless here. He could not fight a whole town. He could not kill a whole world. Annie stopped his hand. She put her own hand over his, the one holding the knife. Her hand was red, the knuckles raw and split from the lye soap. It was not the hand of the bride she had been. It was the hand of a worker. It was a hand as strong, as scarred, as his own. He looked at her hand, and then at her. She was not afraid. She was just tired. But she was here. She had not run. She had stayed. He had been so trapped in his own loss. The loss of his family, the loss of his honor, the loss of his tribe. He had been a man defined by what was taken from him. He looked at Annie, at her hand, covering his. This was what was not taken. This was what was given. He realized his love for her was not a betrayal. It was not a weakness. It was a new code. His loyalty to his tribe was a memory. His loyalty to her was his life. His old world was gone. She was his new one. She was his tribe. She was his people. The borders of his old life, the rules, the traditions. They were dust. Love was the only border that mattered. He put down the knife. He took her rough, soap-scarred hand and, for the first time, he kissed it. He held it to his cheek. "Then we will stay," he said, "and I will not be a warrior. I will be your husband." She looked at him, and the tiredness in her eyes was replaced by the light he had seen in the cabin. "And I," she said, "will be your wife." They sat in the darkness, two outcasts, two traitors, two ghosts. They looked down at the hostile world below them, and for the first time, they were not afraid. They had each other. They were a tribe of two, and they were home. The decision was one thing. The life was another. The days in Pinal Forks bled into one another, a long, gray struggle against contempt. They were a tribe of two, but their tribe was an island, and the sea of hatred was all around them. Nayati hunted. He brought in more meat than the town's paid hunter, and for this, he was grudgingly respected and deeply resented. He was the Injun who was better at their own game. Annie continued to take in laundry, her hands perpetually raw. The coins she earned were few, but they bought the things he could not hunt: flour, sugar, a new cast-iron pot. They were ghosts, but they were visible ghosts, and their visibility was the problem. The women of the town, the wives of the storekeeper and the mine manager, saw Annie as a living insult. She was the woman who had chosen the savage over her own. She was a contamination. They would gather their children when she walked by. They would whisper, their voices loud enough to carry, about her lack of shame. Nayati saw the way their looks cut her. He saw the way she would flinch, her shoulders hunching, but she never cried. She would just lift her chin a fraction higher and keep walking. He, in turn, was a constant target for the town's cruelty. Men would try to cheat him on trades. They would shove him in the saloon. He took it. He, who had been a warrior, who had killed to defend his honor. He now swallowed his rage. He would not fight. He would not give them the excuse they needed to form a mob, to bring the rope. Every insult he swallowed was a testament to his new code. His family, Annie, was his honor. The end came not with a bang, but with a piece of paper. A new marshal rode into town, a man with a hard, self-righteous face and a shiny new badge. He had been sent to bring order, and to him, order meant clear lines. He found Nayati skinning a deer behind their shack. "You," the marshal said, not getting off his horse. "You're the Apache." Nayati did not look up. He continued to work. "I am Nayati. You are on townland. I'm posting this." He nailed a notice to a tree. It declared that all non-reservation Indians were to be removed from the county. For their own protection, you have 3 days to be gone. Nayati's hand stilled on his knife. He looked up. I hunt for this town. I trade." "You are an Indian," the marshal said, as if that explained everything. "And you have that woman with you. It's indecent. The good people of this town do not want it." He turned his horse. 3 days. After that, I will come for you, and I will bring my deputies." That night they sat by their small fire. The notice was on the ground between them. "It is finished here," Nayati said. He was not angry. He was just tired. Annie looked at the paper, at the printed, impersonal words that were destroying their life. She felt a surge of the old, hot rage. But then she looked at Nayati. He was looking at her, his eyes steady, waiting. "Then we will go," she said. She reached out and pushed the paper into the fire. They watched it curl, turn black, and float away as ash. "Where?" "North," he said. "Away from the forts, away from the new towns. There is a place I know. A high valley, by a river. The soldiers do not go there. It is too difficult. It is empty. They left that night. They took what they could carry: the iron pot, a bag of flour, a side of smoked venison, his bow, his knife, and the blanket from their bed. They did not look back. Pinal Forks was just another in a long line of places that had no room for them. They traveled for a month. They were not running. They were migrating. They were a 2-person tribe, moving to a new land. He was weak at first, his wound a dull, aching throb. But with every day, with every mile he put between himself and the white man's world, he grew stronger. The land healed him. He taught her to read the signs, to find water, to move without sound. She taught him to be patient, to endure not with a warrior's cold rage, but with a farmer's stubborn hope. She had brought seeds from Pinal Forks, tiny, precious things: corn, beans, squash. She carried them in a small leather pouch. They were her faith. They found the valley. It was high, sheltered on 3 sides by towering walls of red rock. A river, clear and cold, ran through it. It was, as he had said, empty. The earth was good, the game was plentiful, and at the far end, built against the canyon wall, was a small stone cabin. It was not a ruin. It was sturdy, built by a trapper who had, it seemed, simply walked away. "This," Nayati said, standing at the door. "This is the place." It was not a shack. It was a home. The first year was the hardest. They were completely, utterly alone. There was no store. There was no butcher. There was only the land, and what they could take from it. He hunted. He brought in deer, elk, rabbit. He repaired the cabin, rechinking the stone, building a new, solid roof of pine logs and earth. Annie made the home. She fought the earth. The small patch of land by the river was hard, rocky. She broke it open with a sharpened stick. She planted her seeds. She carried water, bucket by bucket. She weeded. She protected her small, struggling plants from rabbits and deer. It was a battle, fought every day, but she did not give up. Nayati watched her. He, who came from a people who followed the game, watched this woman force life from the earth. He came to respect her stubborn patch of green. He built a fence around it for her, a wall of woven branches. And the life grew. The corn came up, thin and pale. But it came up. The beans climbed the stalks. That winter, he fell ill. Not his wound, but a sickness of the lung, a deep, racking cough that left him weak and feverish. The snows were deep. They were trapped. He could not hunt. Annie did not panic. She used his bow. She was clumsy. Her arms ached from the pull. She missed more than she hit, but she sat for days in the freezing cold until a young buck came to the river. Her arrow was bad. It struck the animal in the flank. She had to track it for a mile and finish it with his knife. A brutal, bloody task that left her shaking and vomiting. But she did it. She dragged the meat home. She fed him. She kept him warm. She saved his life, just as he had saved hers. When spring came, he was thin, but he was alive. He stood at the door of their cabin and watched her planting her new seeds. He walked to her. He did not speak. He took the digging stick from her hand and began to break the earth himself. They worked, side by side, in silence. That summer, Annie knew she was with child. It was a terror and a miracle. To be so alone, to face this. It was a fear she had never known. Nayati was just as afraid. He knew nothing of birth. He had been a father, but he had not been at the birth. "It will be all right," he said, his hand on her stomach, his face a mask of worry. "It will," she said, her own voice betraying her fear. The child came as the leaves were turning gold. The labor was long and terrible. Nimal. He was a son. He had Nayati's black hair and her blue eyes. He was a child of both, and of neither. He was the first of their new tribe. They named him Tiska, the Apache word for white bird. The child changed everything. The silence of the canyon was now broken by his cry. Nayati, the cold warrior, the ghost, became a father again. He had not known his heart could hold this. He would sit for hours, just watching the boy sleep. The grief for his first son did not vanish. It remained, a scar, a part of him. But it was not a killing grief. It was a memory. This new love was a living thing. Annie watched him. She saw the hardness leave his eyes. She saw the way his hands, the hands of a killer and a hunter, could be so gentle. They lived. The seasons turned. The world outside, the world of soldiers and towns, of railroads and hatred. It was still there. But it was distant. It was a bad dream. Their valley was their world. They were not Injun and squaw. They were Nayati and Annie. He was her husband. She was his wife. One evening, years later, they sat outside their cabin. It was no longer a stone hut. It was a home. There was a porch, which he had built. There were pots of wildflowers, which she had planted. The garden was large now, and a small pen held 2 goats. The river, their river, flowed past, the water catching the last light of the setting sun. Down on the bank, their son, now a small boy of 5, was skipping stones. He was sturdy and brown and beautiful. Nayati reached out and took Annie's hand. Her hand was no longer raw. It was strong, calloused, and capable. His hand, scarred and brown, fit perfectly with hers. He looked at her. Her face was lined now, from the sun and from the work. Her hair was still the color of dried grass, but it was streaked with gray. To him, she was more beautiful than the day he had found her, a broken thing in tattered lace. "You are a good hunter," he said, a small smile touching his lips. She laughed, a sound that was still strange and wonderful. "In this canyon." "And you," she said, "are a good farmer. Your corn is taller than mine this year." He looked at his son, who had just let out a whoop of triumph as a stone skipped all the way to the other side. He looked at the cabin, his home, built by his own hands. He looked at his wife, his tribe, his life. The warrior was gone. The ghost was gone. Here in this valley, he was just a man. He had lost his world, his people, and his honor, all to find this, to find everything. He pulled her close, and she leaned her head on his shoulder. They sat in the peaceful, silent twilight, watching the river flow. 2 outcasts who had found their home, not on a map, but in each other. Their love was a stubborn, wild thing, like a flower blooming in the rock, a testament to the life they had built in the heart of the unforgiving, beautiful West. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We would love to hear where you are listening from. So please drop a comment below so we can all connect and share our thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to our channel Wild West Tales, like this video, and give it your full support by pressing the hype button so this story can be heard by more people.